Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all keeping well. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the BSc Horizon. So, in today's episode, even though my opinion is biased because it's something close to my heart, we have a very special guest with us. I mean, we always love seeing like a woman in STEM, but then like a woman in neuroscience, that is pretty dope, right? So, today I'm joined by Dr. Amalia. She recently finished her PhD. It's been 2 months. How are you today?
I am doing good. And how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Firstly, thank you for joining us today.
You're so welcome.
Cool.
So welcome.
So before we get into it, I was trying to think of like what can be a cool icebreaker for someone in neuroscience. And then
Mm-hmm.
I thought maybe if you can tell us what is your favorite brain region, what
Mm-hmm.
does it do, and why is it your favorite?
Okay. Hmm. I'm so biased, but I think my favorite brain region is probably the hippocampus. Hippocampus is involved in a lot of things, particularly learning and memory. Yeah, so it's where all of your information comes into, it's where it gets consolidated, and it basically integrates incoming information with whatever exists in your brain already. And I think I'm biased about the hippocampus because it is the brain region that my PhD was mostly on. So, yeah, hippocampus.
Okay.
What's your favorite brain region?
Hmm. I think maybe the amygdala,
Yeah?
just the fact that it's responsible for fear. I
Mm-hmm.
find emotions pretty something that's interesting. So I think the amygdala will be my favorite brain region.
Amygdala is a very good one as well. I think my second
Hmm.
one is the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex,
Hmm.
where all your decision making happens. And yeah, apparently in men, your prefrontal cortex only develops after 25. So,
No wonder making bad decisions in life, eh? Still developing. Okay, I think that's a pretty cool one. You see, guys, this is why it's pretty cool to have like a woman in neuroscience. So, maybe so that like our viewers can get to know you better, do you want maybe to introduce us to like who was Amalia in high
mm-hmm.
school and like what type of a student were you and
mm,
how that sort of like influenced your way into neuroscience?
mm. Yeah, so yes, Amalia. I grew up in northern Namibia,
Hmm.
so that's where my home is. I went to high school at a Catholic high school, so very religious, very strict, but it was one of the best schools in Namibia.
Hmm.
So just because of that, the environment meant like it was a lot of high performing students, right? So I think because of that environment that I was in, I was a very competitive student in high school. But I feel like I was also a very brave student in high school
Hmm.
because it was in high school where I got this opportunity to apply for a scholarship that then I ended up getting, and it meant that I could finish my high school in Singapore at an international school in
Hmm.
Singapore. Uh, but when I think back at it, I was 15, 16. I had never traveled before. I had
Hmm.
never left really my hometown before. You know, Northern Namibia is so far from even the capital, which is Windhoek.
Hmm.
So when I think about it in that context, I had never even left home to go to Windhoek.
Hmm.
So I was just, I feel like I was, I don't want to say this, but I just feel like I was destined to
Hmm.
be somewhere else and to see the world differently.
Definitely. Mm.
So yeah, I ended up applying for that scholarship, which I then got when I was in grade 11.
Mm.
So when I was in grade 11, I then ended up going to Singapore. It's an international school called United World College. And United World College has different colleges all around the world.
Mm.
And, one of their key pillars is basically using education for peace, right? So they are very into bringing students from low and middle income countries, students from very underprivileged backgrounds. They give out scholarships to those students. So I was privileged enough to get that
Mm.
scholarship. So yeah, I left Namibia knowing very little about the world, and I went to Singapore, and I feel like it was one of the greatest decisions that I ever made. So competitive and brave in
Like,
high school. Yeah.
I think those are pretty important qualities because if you look like in the context of like being like a black African child,
Mm.
especially mostly for girls,
Mm-hmm.
most people don't have the opportunity for education.
Mm,
Mostly, like in some cultures, like, or religions, getting married at a young age, not allowed
exactly.
to go beyond a certain point at a certain
Mm,
grade. So I think then it's pretty cool to then have you follow your dreams and
mm-hmm.
like follow your education, because I really think like that's really important, especially
Mm,
now, given in where the world is shifting, and
mm-hmm.
we need to shift away from the old mentality of like girls need to be married.
Exactly.
No, they need to
Exactly.
be
They
educated.
need to be educated. And I feel like I'm privileged because my mom really valued education.
Mm,
My mom was a primary school teacher, so she taught first grade for about 30 years.
mm,
And she always like instilled the power of education
mm,
into us. So even when we were really struggling at a time where my parents were married, but there was a point where we were a single income household.
mm,
Um, my mom really pushed to make sure that we went to schools that were quite good
mm,
for us to just like really follow that path for us. So she really instilled that education is a big liberator. You can be
mm.
quite independent when you are educated.
Definitely. So then maybe if you mind sharing how was when you came into undergrad,
Mm-hmm.
what courses did you enroll in,
Mm,
and how did you find like the transition from like high school and coming like into uni undergrad?
right. So when I went to Singapore, the United World College has a collaboration with a lot of universities, like a lot of international universities in the UK and in the US. So from then, I then ended up getting another scholarship to go do my undergrad in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the transition was a little bit easier because I was in a foreign country, but I was coming from another foreign country. So I was kind of used to being not at home or to being with people that are not too similar to myself, right? So that transition from high school to undergrad was not as hard as I would assume it would be for other people
Mm-hmm.
for me, just because I had already kind of transitioned from Namibia to Singapore. But when I did go to high school, first of all, I then ended up taking courses that I couldn't take in Namibia. So, in courses that were not in our curriculum. So, I ended up taking uh, psychology, for
Mm-hmm.
example. I took psychology at high level in high school. And I think that's where really my interest in psych came about, my interest in neuro came about. So when I went to uni, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do,
Mm-hmm.
but I knew I really enjoyed biology and I knew I enjoyed psychology. So when I first enrolled, I was a biology and psychology double major.
Okay.
Okay. So I was doing a lot of psych. I really enjoyed psych.
Mm,
I really enjoyed, finding out how our brain controls all of these things, all of our behaviors, all of our
mm,
emotions, and so on. So I was really passionate about that. But at the same time, they were telling us that in psych, you can't really prove anything. You can
mm,
make correlations that, A behavior and I don't know, whatever it is, are correlated, but you cannot say A causes B,
mm,
right? And I was like, cool, but I feel like I really want to get down to the nitty gritty of it. So I was really interested in the way psych and bio kind of intersected, right? So it just so happened that the university that I was at had introduced a neuroscience course,
mm-hmm.
which basically integrated biology and psychology. And I felt like that was where I needed to be, and that was where my passion was. So yeah, that's kind of what inspired me to go into neuroscience. But I must say that in undergrad, I was really interested in more behavioral
Mm-hmm.
neuroscience, right? How we can use basically how the brain controls our behaviors and how our behaviors come about in that context. So I was really interested in that, as well as in
Mm,
more mental health related subjects. Yeah, but then I think I kind of grew away from, not grew away from that, but it just so happens when I came to postgrad, I landed into a very cellular and molecular neuroscience lab, and I do not have any regrets in that
Okay.
regard. Yeah.
It's very fascinating because I mean, the brain controls a lot of things.
Mm,
And like we always think like it's matters of the heart and it's
mm,
all in you, it's all about the brain. So what would be your advice to like undergrad students in sort of like trying to navigate what are my interests? Like what am I interested in? Because I feel like there's this
mm-hmm,
pressure, especially like with someone like doing a science degree in their final year, there's this
mm,
pressure of like, okay, what am I doing for postgrad? Because your
mm-hmm.
lecturers will be like, oh, you're getting good marks in this, you should do
Yeah.
this. And then maybe that's not what you want.
Mm,
So like how do you navigate those feelings and get to make like an
mm-hmm.
informed decision of what to do in postgrad?
I would say just explore. Explore what you feel like you're interested in. I think I was privileged because I went to what they call a liberal arts college. So, in a liberal arts setting, you get to take courses from a whole bunch of areas, right? So, I was taking religious classes, I was taking history, I was taking English literature, on top of the biology and the
Mm,
psychology and everything else that I was doing to fulfill my majors,
mm,
right? So I would say if you are struggling with what you want to get into, just explore. Go out there, explore, see if so. For example, you take a chemistry class, see if you enjoy that, and try again. Try a biology class. Do you enjoy that? And I think from that you can really get a holistic overview of where your interests may lie, and you would never know that if you don't try it,
mm,
right? So I would say be open to learning, be open to trying new courses, that even the ones that you feel like
mm.
so yeah, be open, try new things, and eventually I feel like it will click,
So
it'll
it's all
click.
about being brave again. You
It's
need to be brave.
be brave and just yeah.
Okay. So I mean we know that in high schools, like
Mhm.
maybe during career days, they always talk about like professional careers, being a
Mhm.
doctor, being an
Mm.
engineer. They
Mhm.
never really get to talk about like being a scientist, like doing a
Mhm.
science degree.
Mm.
And I think in a lot of people, especially like people in matric, they sort
Mm.
of have this pressure of like, okay, I'm getting A's. I need to
Mhm.
be a doctor. I
Mm.
need something tangible. I need to be an engineer. I need to
Mm.
be an things like that. But
Mhm.
people never really consider, oh, I want to do science. Like
Mm.
all these things I'm reading in the textbook, that's a scientist that found out all those things.
True.
So I want to explore that. So like what is your advice to
Mhm.
like students in matric in terms of like not being afraid to put like a BSc as your first choice because you're interested in science and you don't want to be an engineer,
Mm.
you don't want to be a doctor. And
Mhm.
also like what advice would you give to parents in terms of like supporting their children in matric and not
Mm.
pressuring them to say, go do medicine, go do engineering?
Right. I think in the long run, you have to live with the career that you choose,
Mm,
right? And I feel like parents need to understand that you can't necessarily force someone to do something that they do not want. I think at the forefront of everything, the support needs to be guided by the student's decision, right? If the student decides that they don't want to do medicine and want to explore more a research career, I feel like the parents should be able to should support that. I know it's not always easy, but for myself, for example, yeah, when we were coming up, it was medicine, it was lawyers, it
mm,
was engineering, and I knew that I wanted to be in a health related field, but I knew that I didn't necessarily want to be a doctor,
mm,
right? And I knew I was really curious about how things worked, about how things function, and I really just wanted to learn more about that. So I feel like students should not be afraid to put a BSc instead of any other degree, because especially here, you also get to do a lot of other things,
mm.
right? You get to explore, especially if you're unsure about something. The people who are just like, sure, like, I want to be a doctor. And then there are people who are like, I'm not too sure.
They're not too sure.
I
Mm,
have these interests, but I'm not too sure how, I can make a career out of it. So I think a BSc is a very good way to explore those uncertainties, because you have room to take a whole bunch of classes, especially the BSc here. You know, you can take genetics, you can take biochem, you can take, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like just to go on that point, yeah, here at UCT, like you can literally even take things from other faculties as long as they don't clash.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they clash, you can sign a concession form to say, okay, I see they clash, but I'm gonna make it work.
Right.
So then, like in that sense, then a BSc, like you said, it's very broad, has a lot of transferable skills. So
Mm-hmm.
then, like it allows you to explore. Actually,
Mm.
I'm more interested in research.
Right.
Yeah. So then, I know a lot of people then come and get enrolled in a BSc and
Mm-hmm.
like it wasn't their first choice.
Mm.
And then how would you then what would be your advice to that person
Mm.
on like deciding whether okay, do I still wanna get into law? Do I still wanna get into medicine or I'm more like into the research? Like making an informed decision and not just maybe like being under pressure of like, oh, people already imagine me as a doctor. And now
Mm.
like, maybe I want to be a neuroscientist. I don't want to be a neurosurgeon. I don't want to be this. Yeah.
Right. That's a difficult. that's that's a difficult one. Um, I think in that case, again, it's just about exploring your interests, really. I feel like you shouldn't, and sometimes there's a lot of judgment with what courses people choose,
Mm,
but I feel like your curiosity should not be bound by what people think
mm,
or what people's expectations of you are. Your curiosities and what you want to do in life should be directed or should be guided by your interests, right? So sometimes it's very disappointing, you know, you don't get into your first option and then you end up, you know, having a backup, you getting into your backup option, for example.
mm,
In that case, I would say just go with it. Go with it, be brave, go with it, see where it takes you. And also, there's so many mentors around you. There's so many people who have also gone through the same thing as you. Don't be afraid to ask people questions. Don't be afraid to approach career, what are they called?
services, career services.
Yes, career services to help guide you, make an informed consent. Because at the end of the day, your interests should be what guide what you end up doing, right? It shouldn't be from any pressures around you, which is quite hard. I
Mm,
feel like it's easier to say when you are at the other side of everything else,
mm.
but trust me, is all I'm gonna say. Just trust me. Go with your interest, and I think things will fall in place and things will fall in line for you.
Definitely take a leap of faith.
And take a
Mm,
leap of faith.
okay. So maybe to all like aspiring neuroscientists out there like
Mm-hmm.
myself. So maybe why neuroscience? Why should we do neuroscience? Mm,
Neuroscience is so interesting. It's so interesting, and there's so much that you can learn, and so many directions in neuroscience that you can take, right? I would say neuroscience because it's, I don't want to say it's an emerging
mhm,
career, but especially neuroscience in Africa, I feel like we stand at a very huge advantage,
mm,
right? Because a lot of neurological diseases, neuroinfections, traumatic brain injuries are happening in Africa. And we have direct access to those sample sizes, to those people, to those um, what is it, to those situations where we can then explore what is happening, right? So I would say neuroscience because the brain matters, because African brain health matters, and because neuroscience is interesting. Yeah, so that's why neuroscience.
okay. So then just out of curiosity,
Mm.
how do you like draw the line to whether should I just do honors? Should I go
Mm-hmm.
to masters? Should I go to PhD?
Mm.
How do you navigate along where must I draw the line?
Where
Where must
must
I
I
end?
draw the line?
Mm,
Where must I draw the line is always a hard one because I feel like because I came into a lab where well, I joined my postgrad lab as a master student,
mm-hmm,
right? And as a master student, there were people of different levels in the lab. Obviously, you had honor students and then masters and PhDs and postdocs, right? So for me, what guided whether I did a PhD or whether I stopped at masters or whether I went to full PhD was just the people around me. I was so inspired. I was so inspired by people who look like me, people who were the same age as me, who were just able to go the full ride to PhD. And also, I know that that's not always the case for everyone. I feel like my support system was really great in just encouraging me in times when I was like, "Ugh, I'm not really sure if I should go for this." They were just like, do it. Why not? You know? So for me, I was really inspired by the people around me to just go on and pursue my PhD. I was also inspired by just I had the opportunity to do it, and I've seen that it's harder for you to stop and then want to go and pick it up again. To so you stop at masters and then a few years later you want to pick it up and go to PhD. It's a little bit harder in that way because when you're younger, you have less responsibilities, if I can put it that way. So most people don't have families yet. So the older you get, I think the more challenges come with trying to pursue a PhD. I'm not saying it's impossible. We have people of all ages getting PhDs, but I feel like the younger you are, probably the less responsibilities you have, and the easier it is to get through the process because it's not an easy one. I'm not gonna lie to you, it's not an easy one. You spend nights in the lab, you spend countless hours just dedicating your whole life to this piece of paper, right? That I feel like the less distractions you have, probably the easier it would be for you. So yeah, for me it was I had the opportunity to do it. I was really inspired and encouraged by the people around me. My supervisors, my colleagues were really encouraging, and it's an achievement that I knew that I wanted. I knew that I was gonna be. Okay, no, let's not put it that way. I knew that I wanted to be a doctor,
Yeah.
right? And I knew that I didn't want to do medicine, so I was gonna get that title one way or another. And I just decided to, to just go
And there
for
you
it.
have it, Dr. Malia.
Exactly.
Okay, so maybe while you're on that topic, I feel like for most people that do a BSc, especially like as a or a Black African child, the concern is always, am I gonna get a job?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe in that sense, can you comment on that? And also in the field of neuroscience, what can you do? Like what career options can you do with
Yeah,
neuroscience?
yeah. I feel like there's so much diversity in what you can do with your neuroscience degree. First of all, the most obvious ones are just academia, where you lecture the future generation of neuroscientists, and a lot of academic positions do come with a research component attached to it. So you are a lecturer, but you also have a lab that you're running that's doing whatever research that that you are interested in. And I think that's an easy way for people to pursue their own research interests without having necessarily to be under someone, right? Because
Okay.
your usually your academic lectureship provides you that opportunity to start an independent research group, and so that's a really cool way to just pursue your interest. You can also just go into industry, independent research labs. I know a lot of people who have gone into drug discovery or vaccine discoveries with their neuroscience degrees. A lot of people are very into computational neuroscience, where you do a lot of modeling of how the brain works and how neurons work, like computationally, and that's really cool. Um, you have people who have gone into science communication, right? Where, you are responsible for, Dr. Haley, for example, is a science communicator for the Neuroscience Institute. You can also be involved in like journals. You can be editing for journals. You can be writing for journals. Um, yeah, there's a whole lot of things that you can do. You can go into government, lobbying for better, funding for health-related neuroscience or neuro-related matters, advocacy as well. So yeah, don't be held back by thinking that you're not gonna get a job. I feel like it's quite diverse what you can do with your degree. So, yeah.
I think you mentioned a very important point because I think a lot of people are unaware of like how broad a
Mm,
science degree is. It gives
mm.
you a lot of skills
It does give you a lot
and
of
you can apply
skills.
them in different industries.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so um maybe to just go sideways.
Yeah.
Um do you mind sharing to us
Mm.
about what your PhD paper was about?
Yes, I don't mind. So, yeah, so I was in Dr. Joseph Raimondo's lab, and Dr. Joe's lab is basically an epilepsy lab, but specifically epilepsy that is secondary to a parasitic infection known as tinea. So the disease that we study is neurocysticercosis. So neurocysticercosis is brought about by basically ingesting a specific tapeworm that you can get from so the life cycle is a bit complicated, but it's humans and pigs, right? So that's where the tapeworm runs. So you can get it from underprepared pork meat. And what then ends up happening is these larvae can get into your brain and they cause cysts. And one of the major symptoms is just epilepsy, right? So in the Raimondo lab, before I had joined, they had found out that um, this larvae actually causes an anti-inflammatory response in the brain, which is quite surprising because if you have a foreign particle in your brain, what's going to happen? You expect your brain to have a very hyper inflammatory,
Pro-inflammatory
right?
response.
Pro-inflammatory response. But what they had found was that this parasite seems to be suppressing host immune responses. So when I joined the lab, I was really interested in then looking at the nitty gritty of this. I was really interested in how the various resident brain cells were reacting to this larva. So I was really interested in microglia, which are your resident fighters in the brain. So if there's any infection, your microglial cells are what become activated to fight off this infection. I was also interested in another cell population, which were astrocytes, which are another glial cell type that is also immunogenic, not immunogenic, but can respond to immunogenic triggers. So I then used hippocampal slices. So we have a model in our lab where we can take the brains of rodent mice. Rodent is mice, but
Yeah, it's okay.
the brains of neonatal mice, and we can section out the hippocampus and then grow it in the incubator for for however long we need it to be. So then we then treated these brain slices with this larvae, right? But we also treated them in concoction or simultaneously with an immunogenic agent, right? So we wanted to elicit an inflammatory response in these slices. And then to that, we then add this larvae to see
What
if,
is it doing?
right, what is it doing to this inflammation, right? And then once you treat, you can then use your brain slices to do a lot of protein assays. So I was doing immunohistochemistry, I was doing ELISAs, and then we also did some transcriptomic analyses. And what we found was that this larvae was stopping or preventing both microglia and astrocytes from becoming activated, right? So the larvae seem to be eliciting an anti-inflammatory response, and we don't know how it's doing it, but it was a very exciting finding because it's one of the only times it's been reported of a specific parasite eliciting an anti-inflammatory response in the brain. So that's kind of what my thesis was about. So I explored that at a transcriptomic level. So we found that, the parasite was also like down regulating a lot of inflammatory genes, right? So you would expect when there's inflammation, you just have all of these inflammatory genes will become activated because they're trying to release pro-inflammatory cytokines. They're doing all of these pro-inflammatory mechanisms to try and fight off whatever infection it is happening, right? But in this, when we treat with this parasite, we just find that all of these genes are very downregulated, right? So the parasite is preventing the upregulation of these genes. And yeah, so that was what my paper was about. So now in my postdoc, a part of it now in collaboration with my other colleagues as well is trying to figure out what in the parasite is actually eliciting this anti-inflammatory response. But now I'm actually postdocing in two labs. So I'm in Dr. Joe's lab and also Dr. Rachel Ndangarabiza's lab. And Dr. Rachel Ndangarabiza's lab investigates neuroimmune responses to cryptococcal meningitis, which is another really major infection in sub-Saharan Africa because it predominantly affects immunocompromised individuals. And as you can imagine, we have a really high population of immunocompromised individuals in sub-Saharan Africa because of the rate of HIV and AIDS, right? So a lot of the people who end up getting crypto are those HIV and AIDS patients. So we are again, just trying to understand these neuroimmune mechanisms to some of the fungal pathogens that cause cryptococcal meningitis. So that has also been a really great experience for me because I have been able to transfer a lot of the skills that I learned from my PhD into my postdoc, which is what you want to do. But also I have been able to really learn a lot of new techniques, a lot of new skills in my postdoc as well. So I think it's a learning process, and I feel like at every stage in your career, you're constantly learning new techniques, you're constantly learning new things, and it's very transferable, as I just mentioned. So, yeah, that's kind of what I have been up to.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. You see, guys, that's why you need to do neuroscience. And I just love the fact that in science allows you to like get to the nitty gritty, like what is happening, and that is what we always wanted to know.
Exactly.
So I think that's pretty cool. So maybe in closing, and two final questions. So, what is your advice to final year science students or those going into final year next year in terms of like choosing a pathway to follow for postgrad? And then also, a lot of people are afraid that they have this like misinformation that if I choose to do honors in neuroscience, I'm stuck with that. So maybe then comment on that too.
Yeah. In choosing a path, honestly, choose where your interests lie. I would also say, like, especially the undergrads who are wanting to go into postgrad, there is a lot of opportunities for you to just meet the people who you would be working under, right? If you're wanting to join an honors program, a lot of the times those honors supervisors are more than willing to sit down with you, tell you what their lab does, tell you what their research is, and then from that you can really gauge if that is something you'd be interested in. You can also gauge whether this is someone you could see yourself working with, right? So one of the things that maybe people don't really talk about enough is that a lot of times in research and in science, you're cultivating relationships that will propel your future, right? So, my advice is to make sure that you are choosing something that you're interested in, but also to make sure that you are choosing supervisors that you feel would support you, whose projects you are interested in, whose projects pique an interest in you. So yeah, that's my advice on that. And the second question was when people feel stuck. No, you can choose to do your honors project with on a certain topic with a certain supervisor, and if you decide that this is actually not what I want to do, you have more than room to pick something else when you go into masters. You can explore. We have people who have just done an honors with us and then go on to do other things.
Okay.
Right? So I don't feel like it is a thing of you are it's solidified, you're cemented that cool, now you're just a neuroscientist.
So you can shift to.
At all
Okay,
you can
okay.
shift to different things. But I think my last advice is just, again, be brave. I would say just go out there, go into the world, learn as much as you can, soak up as much as you can, and then if you want to come back home and share those skills with other people, or use those skills to make a change in those around you. So be brave, go and explore, do as much as you can in the
Mhm.
world, and then come back and use those skills to help improve African brain health.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the world is your oyster, like
The world is
literally.
the world is your oyster. And I know that there are some techniques and some skills that we don't have here in Africa that you can only learn elsewhere. And don't be afraid. Approach people. If you meet people at a conference that you feel you could be interested in their work, approach people, write people, email people. I think that's how I
Mm,
got into my master's program. I basically just emailed
mm,
a lot of supervisors to see if they had projects and to see what their research was. People are really like keen on proactive students, so write to people.
definitely.
Yeah, ask questions, be curious, and yeah, go out there and see the world.
Okay. So you've really given great advices. So maybe like in closing,
Mm-hmm.
um, to like Black African
Mm-hmm.
girls, what is like your final advice to Black African girls in terms of
Yeah.
like not limiting themselves
Mm-hmm.
and not feeling like, oh, it's a men's should be,
Yeah.
then I don't belong in, like, what is your.
Mm. Believe in yourself.
Mm,
You belong. You belong. Um, I feel like for me, one of my biggest inspirations has just been working with Dr. Rachel.
mm-hmm.
Dr. Rachel is so inspiring to me
Oh,
because
definitely.
oh,
Oh.
she's such a brilliant scientist. And when I first started working with her as a master student, she was my co supervisor. So I was working with her really like at the bench, right? So my main experiments I was running with her, and she's so patient. She is so inspiring. She encourages you. She opens opportunities to you. So for me, it's been working with people who look like me, people who look like me, who have achieved more than me. It
Mm,
makes me believe that I can also do that. So you know, you belong. Do not let the glass ceiling limit you. Do not let spaces that do not look like you limit you. You belong to be in that room. You belong to be in that class, and you belong to be a neuroscientist.
mm.
So go for it and help us make African brain health a priority.
Definitely, definitely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for such a wonderful conversation, everyone. As you've heard, you belong in neuroscience. We need more women in neuroscience,
We
guys.
do,
We
we
need to
do.
flex. You need to flex with that education. So that is it for today's episode. Hopefully you all gonna enjoy this episode and you're gonna learn a lot from this episode because I personally learned that I need to be brave. So that is all from this episode. Until next time, thank you.